Hello again and good morning. We would love to go ahead and kick off the experience. So if you have not already, please find a seat so that we can respect your time and get started. Thank you. So good morning, our distinguished community members, partners, and supporters. My name is Keandra Darling, and I serve each of you as one of our two innovation officers here at the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg Center for Health Equity. Thank you, thank you. We are under the proud leadership and guidance of Dr. Kanika Tomlin, who we're happy to welcome on towards the latter half of this year. So she also welcomes you into this space. So as an innovation officer, for those of you who don't know, I see a number of new faces. It is just a fancy way to say that I work alongside community members and organizations to host experiences just like this one in this space. So what is this place? Many of you walked in, you see a nice building. I heard a number of people say, wow, it looks so beautiful in here. Let's talk about what this space is. This is the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg Center for Health Equity. We want to first say that we gather this morning on the ancestral lands of the Tocobaga, Miccosukee, and Seminole tribes, who were the original custodians of this land that we share here in Pinellas County. We want to make sure that we always take time to be really intentional in acknowledging the history of this space so that we can think about how that leads to where we are going. The space that we share today was also once a segregated grocery store, which means that individuals who look just like me, my ancestors, were unable to walk into the building simply because of the color of their skin. Interesting though, because the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg now uses the same place to advance racial equity and to improve the health of our entire community. So why do we believe this work is important? Why do we believe we should be a partner in this experience that you are gathered here for today? The criminal justice system's impact on racial and health equity is significant. Racial disparities in arrests, sentencing, and incarceration rates contribute to systemic inequities. Additionally, limited access to health services for returning citizens, often exacerbated by socioeconomic factors, can hinder their successful reintegration back into community, which further perpetuates health disparities. Addressing these issues, we recognize requires some systemic reforms, including policies promoting equal treatment and increased access to healthcare and support services for all individuals, regardless of their racial and ethnic backgrounds or their criminal history. We hope this experience today will help to start the space and the conversation around this critical work, and that it will continue both in this space and out into community. And when you see opportunities throughout the day to continue the dialogue, please reach out to myself or one of my partners, one of my team members who are in the room, and we'll be happy to talk through how we can partner with you to carry this work forward. So I'd like to thank each of you for showing up and being intentional and being here today to be involved in this experience. I would next like to thank and welcome up our honorable council member and brother, John Muhammad. The honorable council member is the St. Petersburg City Council representative for District 7 and is responsible for helping to bring this experience here to St. Petersburg. So thank you for considering us in this work and also for bringing this opportunity to St. Petersburg. Ladies and gentlemen, our City Council member, John Muhammad.
Ooh, you never stop being nervous. How's everybody doing this morning? Y'all not as nervous as I am, but all right. So I want to start by giving greetings of peace, prayer for peace. We know it's a lot going on in the world and it's crazy, and so one of the, sometimes we say, what up, how you doing, what's going on, what's going down. But in our custom, we greet each other with a prayer for peace. And it's that extension of peace and that prayer for peace that I offer with you, and I pray that God's peace and blessings will follow you throughout the course of the day and the rest of your life. So thank you again for being here. I stand here before you today proud and with a profound sense of gratitude as your council member for the mighty District 7. It is an honor to welcome you to this critical and crucial event, the Community Reentry Experience Simulation. It's a journey into the challenges faced by those seeking redemption and a fresh start after incarceration. First and foremost, I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our partners and collaborators who have played an instrumental role in bringing this event to fruition. Sincere appreciation to the people empowering and restoring communities, better known as PERC. Thank you for being here. The Pinellas County Urban League, the Community Development and Training Center, Horizon Communities, and to all the individuals, League of Women Voters, thank you for being here, and all of the individuals and organizations that are dedicated to alleviating the struggles that are facing returning citizens. Your commitment to this cause resonates deeply, and your support is invaluable. Today, we're not just here to participate in an interactive simulation. We're advocates for change, understanding, and empathy. The challenges faced by returning citizens are not isolated. They ripple through families, communities, and our society at large. It is only by acknowledging, comprehending, and addressing these challenges that we can truly pave the way for a truly rehabilitative justice system. Our esteemed panelists, experts in their respective fields, bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to shed light on the intricacies and that intricate journey of reentry. Their insights, again, will undoubtedly deepen your understanding and our understanding of the collective efforts that we're making towards the compassionate and supportive environment for returning citizens. To our distinguished guests, your presence here today signifies a shared commitment to social justice, rehabilitation, and second chances. Your engagement in this conversation is paramount, and I encourage you to immerse yourselves in the simulation, fostering empathy and igniting the spark of change. As we navigate the simulated month in the life of an ex-offender, let us reflect on the choices, the challenges, and the outcomes that shape the reentry process. Let us experience and let this experience be a catalyst for transformative dialogue, policy change, and a more informed and compassionate community. So again, I thank each and every one of you for being here today. Your presence is a testament to the collective responsibility that we all bear towards those seeking redemption, and I'm confident that together we can make a lasting impact. So to take us into the next portion, I want to bring back Keandra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member. So now I have the esteemed pleasure of welcoming up for you all our moderator for the panel discussion. Not only is she a reporter for ABC Action News, but Rochelle Aline is also an Emmy-nominated journalist and University of Florida graduate who has an immense passion for storytelling. So I'm really excited to see what she will contribute to this experience for this panel discussion. Rochelle Aline, if you could please join me at the podium.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much for your time. I'm so excited to get started, but first we want to actually bring up our speakers. Do you guys need me to introduce you, or do you guys want to walk up and introduce yourselves? So we'll have the speakers come up. I want you guys to come up and turn on your mics, and we'll have you introduce yourselves one by one. Can we give it up for our speakers, you guys? Good morning. Yep. And we'll start left to right. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself for the group?
Absolutely. My name is Judith Scully. I'm a professor at Stetson Law School. I run our social justice advocacy concentration program, and I am an active community activist as well around issues of criminal legal reform and equity, racial equity.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Danielle Thomas, and I am a doctoral student in the Department of Criminology at the University of South Florida. And I also help running programs in the Department of Corrections, doing program evaluations, and working with the incarcerated individuals after their release, helping them find jobs.
Hey, how y'all doing today? My name is Tony Williams. I am currently representing the Pinellas County Urban League. Hey, that's Tony's Angels right there. Y'all watch out. I'm also an owner of Agape Soul Boutique. Also have a educational platform for businesses, which is called Ink the Biz, and I also have a automation platform for businesses where we attach AI bots to your businesses for lead generation and closing leads.
So I'm Junebug Jenkins III. I'm sorry, another life. I'm Brother John Muhammad, council member for District 7, and like many of us, I was one decision away from being incarcerated for a very long time, but I was saved by two things. I had a good wife, girlfriend at the time, and a job that I can go to. And so I advocate for youth jobs, youth employment, because had I not been at work, my life would have been totally different. And I only went to work that day because she made me go. So I'm happy to be here and honored to have this conversation. And again, thank you for attending this experience.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Mahoney. I'm with the Florida Department of Corrections. I'm the department's director for programs and reentry. Programs and reentry consists of all of the academic and programming aspects for the incarcerated population, and we have a section that services our great community corrections partners that are out here in the audience. So I want to give a shout out to them that'll be putting on the simulation, so thank you all for that. Been with the agency for 29 and a half years now. Retirement is kind of in the thought process now, which is kind of weird to think. But thank you for inviting me here this afternoon, and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you all so much. We are about to get started. Just some quick housekeeping. The conversation, hopefully, will last about 30 minutes. Who knows? We might run a little bit longer. But there are some pens on your table. There should be pens. If they're not, please raise your hand and let somebody know. There's also some index cards. We're going to focus some questions to the panel first, and then we want to hear from you guys. So if you have any questions, write them down. When you write down your question, put your hand in the air. Somebody will gather your questions and bring them up here, and we'll also direct some of your questions to the panelists as well. All right, let's get started. Tony, I want to direct this first question to you. What are the key challenges faced by individuals who are reentering society after incarceration?
Okay, it's ironic because yesterday we were doing a presentation at PERC, and we were talking to the group at PERC, and one of the guys, I told him what we were doing today to reentry. He said, well, the next stimulation we need to do is the first day in. I was like, you own the one right there. I get back with you. But I think the most important things needed, I have my notes right here, so don't think I'm playing on my phone. I'm sorry. Computer skills. And when I say computer skills, Microsoft Excel, Word, PowerPoint, OneNote, and Teams, the same things that we use daily to operate. These guys need to have these skills in order to function in society. They need to have professional emailing skills. For as an example, even with me getting a job at the Urban League, the first time I applied, they gave someone else a position. I didn't get it. But when I seen that they put the position back up, it was just a professional email from me to the lady. Hey, am I still qualified? She said, you know what? Come in for an interview. So it's professional emailing. Like you can't email, like if you really look at it, for you to find a job, especially for a convicted felon, you'll send off 75 job searches before you get one reply. And that's monster indeed. I just recently went through it. 75 to 100 is like playing a video game on your phone before you get one reply. And you have to be able to respond professionally in email because these people don't see your face. You don't have the opportunity to get in front of them to, speak and really sell yourself. Another example for as professional emails was when I got my position at Trade Winds. and this is something that I tell people coming home all the time. I actually got the job through an email, and the skills that I put on to that job was the skills that I had in prison. Food and beverage, floor care, and I got a certificate in pest control. And that's what got me a food and beverage position at Trade Winds. Held that position up until the pandemic. And access to business education, which is why I built an educational platform, and additional access to funding, because all convicted felons are not monolithic. I think that the most important part is to make these men back the head of the household. So sometimes you might have to start your lawn care business or pressure washing because that works for you and that's where your passions are. So those things. My next point was access to mental health. And I know people say it's accessible, but it's like, how is it accessible? It's programs like MRT, and which is a moral recognitive therapy, and which is based around conflict resolution. And then you have cognitive therapy sessions. And why this is important is because for someone coming home, you say, hey, go into therapy. We don't trust you. We don't trust them. So they have to be introduced just to the process of going through therapy. Like if you do a group therapy session and say, hey, you guys just did therapy, well, what just happened here? So I know it's a lot of people that's in the therapy field, but these guys have to be introduced to this. They have to be weaned into it. You can't just say, hey, here's a card. Okay, and for my next point was, as far as what do we face, it's society. Dean, if you'll put up the first slide, I want to show you guys some, like, really, I'm going in real time. I know the panelists can't see this, right? But if you look at the date right here, even with me holding the position at the Urban League, as an ACA navigator, I have to go through the insurance process to get filed, to get approved. And I just received this the other day. Dean, can you go to the next page, please? So as an ACA navigator, they wanted me to find these things into my background, and I had to go get certified documents, 1993, 1994, 1995, 2002. These are things that are 20 years old, some 30 years old that I'm dealing with currently right now in real time. So these are the things that we have to actually face. If you can go to the next slide, Dean. So this is actually what I had to give them. This is actually what I had to give them. And I had to go to Tampa, to the federal courthouse, and actually the point on here, and it was on the last slide, they asked me to write out what instances led up to my incarceration, which was actually very triggering to me. It took me about a week to even get it done. Because it's like, you want me to relive this for real? So, yeah, and it's kind of big. So, and for the next one, when I put this next one up, I actually, because we're going in real time. So, if you got your phone out, take your phone out, and I want you to do it too, Brother John, and get ready to Google. Go into your Google search. Because as he put this next one up, I want all of you to Google my first, middle, and last name, please, right now. Google it. You have to do the first, middle, and the last, please.
I like that you're getting the crowd into this.
Interactive simulation.
Crowd participation.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, as an employer, and my qualifications are out of the world, out of this world. I have food and beverage. I have an extensive history in management. I've managed street teams. My qualifications is crazy. So as an employee, the first thing you see when you Google my name, so this is what we're facing. This is real time. This is what I'm facing. Was looking at getting into management with Chick-fil-A. Guess what happened? I was looking for a franchise. I have the qualifications. So with me showing you this, I'm just really showing you what we face, and I really wanted to, put some things into your mind and just ask yourself, like, or have you expressed bias towards somebody that has a felony? And how could someone possibly overcome these obstacles? Like with me, it's really break down to the last situation. It's my spiritual grounding and my spouse. Like, because you can't go out and face the world and come back home and have to fight. Not like this. You know what I mean? So that's, when you say the obstacles, I really want to show you guys real time, and I thank you for your time.
And Tony, it sounds like what you're saying is it comes down to really having those folks leverage their existing skills, access new resources, but also for all of us to be mindful of how you're viewed in society. Is that kind of a fair summation of what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's I'm an ACA navigator, but I still don't officially have the position. I'm waiting on these guys. We've been doing this since November 16th. So yes, I'm hired to have to do a job, but the Urban League might have to find somewhere else for me if this don't work out. You know what I mean? I'll be back doing the same thing.
I do want to toss it to a few other panelists. You guys can.
Can I add to it?
Yeah, go for it.
So those are really good points from somebody that actually experienced releasing from prison back into the community. And as we all know, as human beings, we're all pretty complex, so we all have needs. And those that are incarcerated for years upon years, they have needs as well, and then it's exacerbated throughout their incarceration. They're experiencing trauma while incarcerated. So those are all really good examples. But what I think what I'd like to strive home here is with the community involvement as well. So addressing the needs, and Tony having the experience he had, and him having the internal strength to know how to, or at least more than many, how to navigate the community waters. We need the community's involvement more, and we're trying to do that more and more often, is getting the community support, churches, other faith organizations, social service agencies, really getting to know who is coming back to their community. Oftentimes the Department of Corrections, maybe rightfully so, but I don't think so, we're graded on recidivism. I think the grade on recidivism is our community and our community's involvement. But it's easy for policymakers to look at the state agency and the prison system and grade us on recidivism, and we should be. But really, I think a lot of the conversation needs to be based on community involvement, because again, 90% of the individuals incarcerated will be released back to our communities one day, and that's our goal: successful and safe and healthy communities.
And I'm going to jump in. I agree exactly with what Mr. Mahoney is saying. It's not just about the operations inside of the prison, but if the society the individual is being released to is not receptive to them coming out to try to better themselves and be successful in the community, then they're going to end up back in this perpetual cycle of incarceration, and those recidivism rates will continue to increase. Like Mr. Mahoney was saying, the community needs to open up and provide second chances to these individuals. And it's not the not in my backyard mentality, such as, oh, this so-and-so agency hired them, but we won't. You can't have that mentality that you're not going to be affected by it. Because quite frankly, by the community not helping these individuals, we are reducing the public safety in our community, because these individuals have to do anything they have to do for means of survival. So if we aren't providing them housing and a roof over their head, they have to go trespass to find a safe shelter for them for that night. If we aren't providing them employment opportunities, these individuals had to find other ways to feed themselves. So the stigma and the labeling with society has got to change. And it starts with yourself. It starts with each one teach one. Teach a different member of the community that these individuals coming home are not, like you said, the individual that committed the crime 10, 20, 30 years ago. You can't hold that crime to somebody after years of them serving their time. Them being incarcerated was their punishment. We are not incarcerating them for punishment while they are serving their time. I say this everywhere I go, so if you've seen me somewhere, you've heard this. Reentry starts the moment somebody is incarcerated. We don't wait for a year until they're released. We don't wait until 6 months until release, because quite frankly, like Mr. Mahoney said, 95% of this population is coming home. Don't you want your future neighbor to be prepared for reentry? Do you want a future manager of an agency prepared to run that agency? We have to start considering that it can actually affect yourself. And if you continue that label, you're pushing them into a perpetual cycle. Open up your arms to this community and realize that they are not the person that committed this crime years ago. That's why we include all these plethora of academic vocational programs within the prison. It's to better them and prepare them for release. And you also brought up a good point about digital literacy skills. Even if somebody was incarcerated for 5 years at this point, technology's continual advancement moves so quick that they could be easily pushed behind. If an individual comes out and they don't know how to operate a phone or a laptop, guess what that means? They can't send in a job application. You want to know why? Because I've tried it myself. You can't go to these businesses and fill out an application like you used to in the old days. Everything's online, and it's not about just accessibility, it's also about affordability. You're telling a returning citizen to come home, and you're assuming they have access to internet. There's a lot of things that we don't consider prior to an incarcerated person's release that needs to be considered before they reach that gate, and that's what I'm a huge advocate of. Job resumes in the prison. Professionalism in the prison, teaching values in the prison, so that when they come out, they're already prepared. Because I've interviewed over 100, even more than that, incarcerated individuals at over 10 different prisons, and a lot of these individuals you think are begging to come home, right? You think they're ready? Actually, a lot of them are scared to come home. They feel like they are not prepared. They have not been given the resources and the skills that they need to be successful in society. So they fear they're going to end up right back where they started. So us opening our eyes and advocating for community members to get involved with prison work and actually step foot into the jails and prisons to see what's going on, that's what we need. Don't consider yourself a community correctional advocate when you don't really know what's going on in these jails or prisons. You can only read and learn so much, but going in will open your eyes and it'll bring a whole new outreach where you'll start wanting to include your loved ones to go back and help.
Thank you. Professor?
Yeah, I want to just follow up on something that Tony mentioned as well. You said that individuals who have been previously incarcerated are not monolithic, right? And the problem is that most of us think of, and when I say us, I mean community members who have not been incarcerated, think that this is just one monolithic community, right? And that they're all dangerous, that everyone who has been incarcerated is dangerous and a threat to us. And there's this huge stigma that's attached to anyone who has been previously incarcerated. You don't have an opportunity to be given the benefit of the doubt, right? We actually, as a society, tend to just push people to the side, and the legal system is set up to keep you incarcerated, right? Even when you are, or you have already fulfilled your sentence, you've already served your time, you come out of prison, and there are all these restrictions that prohibit you from actually being a full citizen, right? You don't have the opportunities that everyone else has, right? You were talking about how stigma may impact you, Tony, in terms of applying for a job, but there's so many other restrictions that exist as well that the legal system has to begin to deconstruct, right? You can't get professional licenses. There are certain occupational licenses that you can't get. You can't have access to food assistance. You're kept out from certain housing opportunities, right? And so everywhere you turn after you get out of prison, there is a barrier facing you. And without the community wraparound services that you were talking about, this individual just feels locked out of society and out of their lives generally. You're even, in many instances, because of housing restrictions, forced to not even be able to be with your family or to go back to the community that could provide support for you, right? And so as a human, you are really just pushed to the side and treated worse than an animal. You've just come out of a cage, literally. And we need to actually realize that that's what we do in incarceration. We cage people. You have just come out of a cage, and you don't have the benefit of having your loved ones and your community and your family wrap around you, much less having social services available to you, right? And the fact that anyone who is previously incarcerated actually is successful is a miracle. We need to actually recognize that as well. The struggle that previously incarcerated people go through is more than most of us can actually even begin to imagine. And so I'm so glad that today this simulation is set up so that people can at least begin to start thinking about what does it feel like to come out of a cage and then be faced with all of these restrictions in terms of how you can get reintegrated and get that second chance that you deserve, right? The system is literally set up for failure. It's set up for individuals to not be able to reintegrate. And we as a community have to address those issues, whether it's through legal reform or whether it's through community services and wraparound social services. And I know, Tony, you also mentioned the incredible need for mental health services as well. Absolutely. You have been through trauma and you are facing trauma on a regular basis with these phenomenal setup of limitations and restrictions on your life.
Danielle, Tony, do you want to answer?
Now, I just
Go ahead.
want to add that, for a person just coming home from prison, you definitely need therapy. If that person did any time in the hole, he needs 2 therapists. And it's all about the mind state. Even when the individual's coming home and the community. And we have to go in here with full understanding that we have to make these men back the head of their household. The programs that I went through, in the federal halfway house, I got a job at Gyros. Hey, you got a job at Gyros? Cool. Go home on home confinement, because I completed what they needed for that program. But Gyros is not going to assist me at all in living in St. Petersburg, Florida. So where are we actually leaving this person at? You know what I mean? And far as even with me showing my entire rap sheet, I know some people looking like, wow, that's a lot of charges. Maybe the DOC's looking like, that's it. I have no violence, which is a completely another barrier. Because if you got violent charges, you can't get hired even in the hospitality field, period. So that's another barrier. So it's like saying that we're not monolithic was perfect, because it's different barriers. It's like I'm at this barrier, but for someone that had a armed robbery along with this rap sheet, he's really in trouble.
Thank you, Tony. And Danielle, I did want to direct this next question to you. I'm going to kind of combine a few questions. We've talked a lot about job readiness, right, as a way to reduce recidivism, but what are some other things when we think about reentry? What are some other parts of that we can think about when it comes to helping reduce recidivism, right? We want to make sure they have employment, but what else can we be doing to keep them from going back into the system?
I would say a huge thing is education in general. So making sure that these individuals, if they have the opportunity, have participated in educational programs where they can receive certificates or where they can actually receive their GED. This education is crucial because Like he mentioned, having a violent offense is this double barrier. But when you have education and you can actually present yourself to an employer, there's means of going around this job search strategy for those with a record. Literature has shown. And it's quite difficult because, like you mentioned, including in checking that box on the application, have you been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years? A lot of these returning citizens don't know how to fill out the box below that, where it says, please explain. So disclosure is a huge thing that us corrections scholars look at, because when is the right time to tell an employer that you have a record? Is it in the application process, right when you receive the application, and maybe when you get a call back? Maybe you're hired and then you tell the person, because 94% of employers run background checks. So even if somebody says no, that they have not been convicted in the last 7 years, this employer is still aware of their record. So in reality, I like to say there's no hiding from the box. Exposure to one's criminal record, like he saw by Googling his name. You can just Google somebody's name and see everything about their history and their background. So being educated and having a foot in the door when you go to sell yourself to an employer, this is all the certificates that I've done. I completed my GED while I was incarcerated. These things are referred to as positive signals that show that one has intrinsic motivation. They're taking it upon themselves to continue their education while incarcerated, because, quite frankly, they don't have to do programs while they're incarcerated. It's voluntary. So this individual may choose not to opt in programs, and then when they get out, they have nothing to show. So it's being educated and being aware of how to sell yourself to those employers to increase their chances and their likelihood of employability. And it's not at menial jobs, because, as he mentioned again, you can only afford so much by having a job working at a fast food restaurant. Nowadays, with inflation, you need a good, stable, well-paying job. So one of our goals as academics is not just finding these individuals any type of job, but finding them a job that they can have longevity in, where they're getting paid slightly above minimum wage so that they could be the breadwinner of their family again, or they could be successful and not living paycheck to paycheck. Because with all the other barriers that they're going through, that's the last thing that somebody needs to be worried about. And also, another thing that I would say to answer your question is having updated resources for them while they are incarcerated. So figuring out what county somebody is returning to and start giving them the resources while they're incarcerated, because every incarcerated individual in the state of Florida has access to a JPay tablet. So they can start connecting with employers, with transitional houses, things like that. I'm getting released in January. Is there beds available? Can I connect with the director of the program? And trying to set yourself up, because it's not just for the incarcerated population, it's in society too. You have to fight for yourself. You have to fight nowadays to receive good health care. You have to fight nowadays to get your name out there. It's not just for an incarcerated population, but you really got to want it. You got to fight. You got to show how bad you want it. Because, like you were saying, they are already labeled. So they're already coming out beneath everybody else. So to try to elevate themselves that much more, they have to seem like they fit in with society, that they're educated on the resources of what's going on, that they do have some sort of degree, that they have participated in these programs, and they can show in a formal job application, just showing up to this employer, not receiving an application, because a lot of them base their application off of hard skills, which is things like one's references, things like one's education and the skills, but going to show your soft skills, things like your own motivation, your own trustworthiness. A lot of the research has shown that those returning citizens are some of the hardest, long-working individuals in their agency that they've ever had. In fact, a positive example is when these individuals come out and they do well in this agency, it starts opening up the door for other returning citizens, because that employer now feels confident. You know, I hired Joe. Joe came out, he did great. And now I'm hiring Sally, Anthony, and it just opens up a platform for these individuals to start having success. But it starts with yourself. You got to be educated. And you don't got to be educated or motivated when you're getting out tomorrow. You got to be educated and motivated the day you're sentenced and start working on yourself. Because the DOC is not going to come knocking on your dormitory and say, hey, you, I think you really need to work on yourself. Everybody has to take it upon themselves, just like we do in society. And a lot of times we push the blame on DOC or on directors of programs or on a research evaluation, but we don't look at who the person was not participating or choosing to participate. We can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. It's the same thing in the reentry world. You got to be motivated.
Councilman Muhammad, I want to bring you into this. So we've talked about barriers when it comes to job readiness and community support, but what about housing? Where does housing fit into this conversation?
I think housing, thank you for that question. Housing is huge because, as was mentioned, like you have so many barriers to housing, barriers to where you can live. And I remember talking to one of my friends, and I'm not distracted either. I'm actually trying to find my notes so I don't go too long. But barriers when it comes to housing and reentry, you got to think, if you've been gone for a significant period of time, when you come home, you have to come home either to some social services or some type of social housing or with a relative. And so a lot of cases, it's that community support. So when you come home, you probably on somebody's couch for, a few months. And this is what one of the brothers told me. He said, man, I got to hurry up and get myself together because I'm one argument away from being homeless. Literally. Because after they get tired of you, and he was telling me about how he cleaning up, he trying to, earn his keep and do what he can while he navigates this journey, because you can see the frustration of somebody who's welcoming you back into society, into their home. They begin to grow impatient with you as you're trying to search and you're trying to get yourself together. So that pins and needles and the clock is ticking, and then you have to submit the background checks. So once you apply for housing, one of the first barriers is that background check. So after you complete the background check and they do the screening, you might be disqualified from a housing opportunity. You might have fees and fines, and so you got to pay inordinate fees. You have to pay probation fees. You have all of these financial responsibilities that are accompanying you coming home. So I don't know if y'all tried to find a place in St. Pete, recently, but you see what the prices are, for rental housing, and if you have to meet that 3 times the rent, burden. And we were here about a month ago for an Alice presentation where you see that there are people who are working good jobs but still can't afford to pay for housing costs. As a returning citizen, if one of the qualifications is a rental history, you don't have rental history because you've been gone for 5 years. And so the last time you had your name on an application might have been never, because a lot of times you go in without, you were 18, 19, or early 20s, and you didn't have a place. And so when they're looking at your rental history, that may be a disqualifier. The housing policies, like, again, Professor Scully mentioned, like there's policies that are in place right now that, say if you have a conviction or felony conviction on your record, then need not apply. And so those are some of the housing challenges and barriers that I see that are happening. And so ban the box policies, I think, are good, but you can't, even when you ban the box, it basically stalls out the process, and you can't legislate compassion. You can't legislate empathy. You can't legislate a perspective and reality on somebody coming home. And that's why we wanted to put this simulation on today, because there are some of us in this room who are the decision makers, who are sitting behind that desk when a person comes in. You're an intake specialist, you're a case manager, and the rules are what the rules are, and the policies are what the policies are. But there are some institutional practices that also need to change, and that's not up to anybody except for the individual that's there. That sounds like my cue to stop. So. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to address that question before we move on?
The only thing I would add is a note that was just raised earlier about needing to have education, right, within the prison system, not just afterwards, right? But we need education of the community as well, right? If the community doesn't change its perspective on what it means to have returning citizens, then we're not going to dismantle the barriers that exist, right? A lot of the education needs to be in the community of people who have never been incarcerated. You have to understand that when people are incarcerated, they are isolated, they are placed away. You mentioned being in the hole, right? I don't even know if most people even know what being in the hole means,
They
right?
seen it in the movies.
Well, but still,
They seen it in the movies.
if they're interested in looking at those kinds of movies, right? Which a lot of people are really they push that to the side. It's not their reality. It doesn't impact them, so they don't care about that, right? And so when you think about what does it mean to be isolated, not just within a prison, not just in a prison, but within the prison itself, right? Where you are 23 hours in a cell all by yourself, no human interaction. What kind of impact does that have on an individual? You know it if you've experienced it, but if you haven't experienced it, education is required. We need to have conversations about that as well. What does that mean? What does that do to the human spirit, right? And we don't have those kinds of conversations. So there's education that's needed on the outside of the prison walls as well. And you mentioned, or it was mentioned, that self-advocacy is really important. It's not just enough to have the skill set, but you have to know how to present yourself, how to advocate for yourself. And that is not something that just drops from the sky, right? That is literally a learned skill set as well. And we have to focus more on how do we help people advocate for themselves so they can then become engaged in community advocacy, civic engagement, and be productive citizens as well. But it starts with self-advocacy and understanding how to promote yourself and package yourself and to talk about your experiences in a way that brings people in and helps us create greater compassion.
Michelle, can I ride that wave real quick?
Yes, please.
Because that was something I lost that thought. Another part of education is educating landlords so that landlords are aware of what the experiences are. So when you do see the background check, you can double click on it and then make a decision based upon the human being and not the number or the information on the app. And then when we talk about education, I think it's a point to reference that there's a difference between education and schooling, and the education that when I hear it and I talk about it, like we can get those different types of things, the degrees, the certifications, but the most people who I've seen who are successful in reentry are people who have been educated and who are knowledgeable about who they really are and having a knowledge of yourself, a knowledge of the time, a knowledge of the circumstances, a knowledge of the realities of society, and a knowledge of the game and the way that it's rigged against us. Like that knowledge has been, that's what saved my life. When I realized that who the media told me I was, I'm not, and I broke that agreement because I was told that I was at risk. I was told that I was a thug. I was told that I was, this was in the 90s at the height of the escalation of the war on drugs when black males were even referred to in some cases as an endangered species. And so we grew up, and I came up in that era, and so I believed the hype. I know I listen to Flavor Flav, they say don't believe the hype, but a lot of us believe the hype. And so as you're getting knowledge, you have to know who you are and whose you are, and then you can start to accept greater responsibility for the decisions that you make. It's not to blame anybody, but it's responsibility, and society does have a responsibility in that. But once you realize, like, I am not who they told me I am smart, I am intelligent, I'm smart, I'm kind, and I'm important. Like how you affirm yourself. Because when you talk about that, the self-advocacy, if you have low self-esteem, if you believe that, this is the path that's for you and that's all that you'll ever be and that's all you'll ever amount to, and you have that agreement that's operating silently, then you'll start to show up in the world that way. But once you change your mindset and you realize who you are, and I'm a spiritual man, and I was created in the image and likeness of God. And it's like, okay, well, what does God do? God is strong, God is wise, God is powerful. All of these attributes that we don't ascribe to ourselves, and then we have we have transferable skills. And so being able to do an assessment and say, what am I good at? Even if you never had a job, if you were doing anything in the streets with any degree of success, there were some skills that you were applying. So being able to understand what those skills are and how those skills skills can now be transferred into your journey as somebody who's returning into society and not use, I guess I could say it like this, you got to use your power for good. But if you don't understand the power that you have, then you'll never be able to tap into it. And so when we talk about education, that knowledge of self is a very critical point for me. And that's what I'm really big on promoting and pushing as well.
I want to touch that real quick too. When you say education, you do have to realize that some of these grown men are gonna come out of prison illiterate. Just a quick story. I was managing at Trade Winds, and I literally went and got my cousin off the block, come out here and work with me. First time he ever got an identification at 33 years old, because he was on the block. He worked with me for about 4 years. About 7 months, and I had to let him go. But when I let him go, he found the love for working. This man is functionally illiterate. He went and got a job with an electrician who taught him how to do everything with his hand. The same way Granddaddy used to do. You go into the body shop on the summer with Granddaddy, you're going to learn how to fix cars. Because some of us are not book smart. So with him going and learning these skills, even during the pandemic, I ain't have a job. This man kept a job. He's working right now in the electrician field. He's functionally illiterate. And I asked him, I say, well, how do you know what to do? He say, I just see what supplies they bought for the day, because he using his game. He using what he learned from. So I'm going to pay attention to what y'all bought for me for the day, and that's how I know what we finna do. So now I just go to working. So we got to understand that some of these guys are not going to be educated, and none of these guys are going to be the same. We can't put people in programs and say, hey, like Perk, if you put me in Perk and said build somebody anything, you're in trouble. I guarantee you, you're in trouble, because that's not my skill. But speaking to the DOC guys, I'm a cook. It's chicken day. I can fry 1,700 pieces of chicken, and I'm heralded on the compound like I'm that dude. Straight, like, so. You got to take people's skills for what they have, and we have to cultivate them skills. We can't just throw them over here and say, do what all these other guys doing, because you'll be all right. That ain't going to work.
The average literacy rate of the population and incarcerated in the Florida Department of Corrections is less than a 6th grade level. That's the average. About 55% of our population need academic programming, meaning they're either illiterate or they don't have a high school diploma or GED. About 55,000 of our population. About another 50 or so percent don't have any workforce skills, 0. About 60% of our population have a substance use treatment need. Not that they've just done drugs once or twice in their life. No. They're full-blown, have a treatment need. They need to be in substance use treatment, about 60% of the population. 6 out of every 10, if you walk a compound, have a significant treatment need. This is a great conversation. Reentry is really complex. It sounds simple, give them some support, but no, human beings are very, very complex people, and the individuals incarcerated are even more complex and have more needs than the general population. We were talking about, statistics and workforce needs. A formerly incarcerated person is 5 times more likely to be unemployed than the general population. 5 times more likely to be unemployed. Providing them, now there are studies out there, and Danielle touched on some studies. There are studies out there that say you give an individual correctional education, whether that's academic education or career and technical education, they're almost 15% less likely to recidivate. Just providing them some resources while they're incarcerated, almost 15% less likely to recidivate. Those are national studies out there. And Florida is pretty similar to what what the national studies and what the national trends look like. But yeah, this is great conversation. Reentry is really complex. Good discussion. But you know, this is just the beginning. Having these community conversations, educating the community becoming more involved in the correction system. I like to say, and there's a lot of talk about the Department of Corrections, so I'm here to defend us. We do great work in the Department of Corrections. We don't do it to the scale of the population, to the needs of the population. We have academic education, and there was some talk about self-advocacy. That's really tough. An individual incarcerated advocating for themselves. Hey, I need programs. That's usually not the case. That as soon as they get behind the fence and the wall, that internal wall comes up, and they don't need help. They don't want help. They don't want anyone's help. So in order to get to the point where they are self-advocating for themselves, they got to somehow mature and understand that, you know, we all need help.
And just on that vein, that's the other part, again, why I wanted to bring this simulation, because for those who are working with people who come through your doors seeking help, understanding what it took for them to get to that place. Like, you don't know how they had to talk themselves into like going, or somebody been telling them, or, you know, in some parts of our culture, asking for help is a sign of weakness. You know, you don't need help. And if you know, this whole independent mindset. And so when somebody finally breaks down and say, you know what, I need some help, and they come to you for help, but now you got an attitude. Now you had a bad day, or now you know, see them, you don't see them as a person. You see them as another task, another problem that needs to be solved. That's why we wanted you all to be here today, to experience what it's like, because when somebody really breaks down and say, I need help, they need people to be around them and be supportive, because if you don't understand, you know, when I come for help, and it took me a whole lot. I had to swallow my pride, especially like if I was successful in my previous life, and now I actually got to come to you and ask you to help me get something. It's a lot of emotion and things that face that. And when you shut them down, or you treat them in a way that's not consistent with the mission and vision of your organization, right, then you might send that person into a spiral, and that might be that last straw that caused, you know what, I'm just going to take a chance, because what I was doing before, I'm familiar with that. I'm not used to asking for anybody to give me anything. I'm used to doing things for myself, and I'm trying to do right on this side, but you don't understand that. You have no appreciation for that. You might be that person, or the words that you give that person might be one that helps them and sends them on their journey into success, or your word that day might be the straw that broke a camel's back, because you were too busy to give them the time and attention that they needed when they came to you for assistance.
Yeah, we also talk about, you know, the incarcerated population. We can't forget those that are on community supervision too. We have 85,000 plus individuals in prison in Florida. We have 140,000 plus individuals on some form of felony supervision. The needs of that population is just as great as the needs of the individuals incarcerated, and they're amongst us. They're in our communities. They're walking. We're employing them. The percentage of need is almost similar to the prison population. So individuals that are on supervision, walking the streets, in the grocery stores with us, in the movie theaters with us, working alongside of us, they have about a 60% substance use treatment need as well. So the needs are great, not only amongst the 85,000 plus, but also the 140,000 plus that are on supervision.
Thank you all so much for your answers. We do want to take some community questions. Does anybody have any questions? You can, yes, please raise your hand. We'll go around and, oh, there's one up here too. There should be paper and pen at your table if you can write down your questions. I was going to say. Ma'am, go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead and speak.
That you can be heard in the room, since there are individuals who are in the back. So,
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. I'm Angela Taylor Sweet, Urban Technology Institute, a digital disruptive engine with the capacity to streamline policy and practice that impede potential to sustain poverty. And what I wanted to ask you, are you aware of the United Nations Criminal Punishment Initiative, where they lay out from around the world the mass incarceration, America being number one, 2.3 million of our African American black men hibernating in jail. They have a wonderful layout as to what can we do about calculated human trafficking. They want to sanction it. It is illegal. Calculated human trafficking. So are you aware of this UN layout? Really? You're answering questions here. You're trying to find out answers to your questions. They've already laid it out already. But America fails to implement, have not implemented some of those wonderful ideas. And what the one last idea is that they need prisoners, those who have been incarcerated, and many of them have been incarcerated for 20, 30, 40 years. They even have prison nursing homes. So when we can get an ex-offender to tell us what we need. It's a whole nother world up in there. We can't do it. They are going to do it. You see, so what I want to know is, are you aware of this wonderful initiative? But the UN, they're trying to stop this calculated human trafficking, which is incarceration, recidivism, and everything else that goes along with it.
Thank you.
Well, I'm actually not aware of that initiative, but I can say that prison is a business. So you got to realize that, like, people's salaries got to get paid. So the prison's going to be staying open. America's opening up billion-dollar prisons right now. So it's really on us. I'm going to look into the UN initiative, but I can say, like, in America, like, prison is a business, so that you just got to approach it like that. People invest money in the prisons. Barker, one of y'all favorite, major investor in businesses, in prison. That was his Barker Products in prisons. Keefe, you go to commissary, you purchase a Keefe, owned by the Bush family, the presidential Bushes. That's what I'm talking about. So it's all business. So that's what I can add to that.
Thank you so much. Oh, we have one more question back there. Oh, two at that table there. Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions here. One is, what is the reentry rate for women in Florida? I don't know if we have specific data for by gender. And also, how does custody look for returning citizens, especially if the person gave birth while incarcerated? Do we know those answers?
So the female population in Department of Corrections is just under 10% of our total population. So roughly, 8,000 or 9,000. No, actually, it's lower than that now. It was prior to COVID. But it's roughly 10%. And what was the second question?
What does custody look like? So if somebody is reentering and they gave birth while incarcerated, do we know what that process looks like for them to gain custody of their child?
So at Lowell Correctional, we have one wing, one dorm, which is our pregnancy dorm. So if we receive an individual that's expecting a child, they will go into the pregnancy dorm and they will give birth to the child while they're incarcerated, and they will be able to, for not for the entire incarceration, but for the beginning portion of child rearing, is the mother will care for the child for a short period of time, and then the child either goes to a family member. Typically, it goes to a family member while they serve their period of incarceration.
Not to keep you in the hot seat, but there's another question that I think you can answer first. They have a question about elderly folks who are reentering society, and what services there are for elderly folks who are reentering, and if they are also handicapped. Do we know of any programs or things in the community for those folks?
Yeah, as you could expect, our population, our incarcerated population is aging. The population is growing older and older. So yeah, and our healthcare costs are rising as well because of that. There are similar services for the elderly population that in the community and in prison, similar to the general population. So we do have services for most populations, including our what we call the ADA individuals.
Danielle, and possibly Councilman as well, I want to direct this question to you. What does advocacy look like for prison reform and for reentry reform, right? We've talked about reentry from a community perspective, but if we want to talk about it from a systemic perspective, how do we engage with our lawmakers and legislators to get them into the conversation?
Going up to Tallahassee during legislative and speaking your mind using evidence-based research and not trying to attack politics or legislative in a cruel manner. You need to learn to come to a consensus, and it's not one party against the other party. It's kind of getting everybody on the same page and approaching them in an easy manner, I should say, and being well prepared with research findings that you have. It's not approaching legislative with an idea. We all have an idea, so it's actually approaching them with things that have been done, pilot programs that have been ran, statistics that have shown effectiveness. That's the best way to kind of encourage legislative, and also getting involved with senators and representatives that do a lot of prison advocacy work, and attending reentry and community events that you know will have legislators and politicians there, because you can start the conversation informal, which is what I've done in a lot of ways, which can lead to more formal conversations and changes being done. Senator Jeff Brandes also started his Florida Prison Policy Project roughly a few months ago, and he is looking for community advocates to help him, as well as academics to funnel evidence-based research. So I've also been trying to consider advocates and reentry experts to help out in this area. And he's got a lot going, and one person holds a lot of weight. So the more that you get somebody at that type of level on board, they can sort of take your agenda and start pushing it for you. But it's never approaching them in an inappropriate manner, and it's always about having a plan and some facts in place. Don't just come ready to talk about an idea.
I'd recommend you start with your city councilman first.
Well,
Can I talk to you?
absolutely.
So I got legislation.
So the other part of this is understanding the levels and layers of government, because I mean we passed local legislation to help and support in areas that, as soon as we pass it, it gets preempted by the state. And so understanding that there are things that can be done at a local level, there's things that can be done at a state level and then a federal level, and then when you're making your approach, making sure that you have the right target audience. So yes, you can talk to me, but if you're talking to me about a state policy, then what I can do is refer that to our city's Legislative Affairs and Intergovernment Relations Committee and see if that's something that we as a city would like to champion and get behind. But the ultimate decision in some of these policies are at the statewide level. And so understanding the levels of government, the layers of government, and then also I would say, again, those of you who are in here, because it starts with all of us. And so if there's some policies and procedures within your organization, if you're a landlord, understanding where you are as a landlord on these issues, having conversations with people who we and returning citizens engage with on a day-to-day basis is another point of advocacy. I'm not an either or type of person. It's like all of the above. So all of the things that were said earlier, in addition to what can you do in your job and in your role and in the places that you operate is another point of advocacy. And I think a good model that we can really understand and really use is the model that worked for Amendment 4. When we were advocating for Amendment 4 and that grassroots meeting, the grass tops, as I like to call them, in advocacy, understanding second chances and talking about it in a way that really reflects the need for a justice system, not a punishment system. Because right now, what our thoughts are, I think the line has been blurred between punishment and justice. And so because of that, our system has been designed to continue to pile on all of these punishments, but then we start getting into injustice because a person who served their time, they paid their dues or paid their debt to society, is still being punished. And that's where we get into injustice. And so really being able to draw that line for our policymakers. And also the last thing that I say is really making the case financially, because of the cost of locking people up is inordinate. And there's ways that, you know, some people, we talk about the business of prisons. There are a lot of people who profit from prisons, but then being able to show lawmakers and how the economic impact of incarceration and recidivism on their districts and on their areas is another point of entry, I think, for having conversations with those who have that business mind. Because inequity, I think there was a study done a few years ago that showed that inequities in Pinellas County cost, you know, several billions of dollars. And if we just had an equitable system, we can tilt the scale financially as well.
Yeah, I want to co-sign on what you just said too about how economics is really how, at least with our legislature, they understand that language, right? What is the cost of this policy? What is the cost of changing this policy? That's really, unfortunately, the major way in which legislators hear and process information right now in this state. And you mentioned as well that maybe this isn't a policy reform issue necessarily, right? It's also an administrative reform. What are you doing within your own agencies? I really, when you said that, it really resonated with me, right? What are we doing individually in the community, in the agencies that we're working in the realms that we are operating in? What are we doing to help make things better? Because if we're waiting on legislative change, we could be waiting for a really long time, right? And in the interim, there are things that we can do.
So, I'm because I had to go through this process and thinking about legislation while y'all speaking about legislation. I think legislation should cross with statute, and being that there's a statute of limitations on crimes, so that same statute should apply on the back end. Because what I looked at on my situation, I have federal charges. It's a 10-year statute of limitations. I've been home 12 years. So the statute should apply on the back end. If it apply on the front end, it should apply on the back end also.
We're going to ask 2 more questions from the audience. I'm going to combine this one. Do you guys have any, when we think about recidivism, do you guys have any examples of successful programs that are helping people stay out of the system? And especially when it comes to youth, this person said that youth exiting the system typically have high rates of recidivism. Any examples of success stories or programs?
Sure. There is and has been an example through the Missouri model for juveniles. It's been in existence for several decades, and the recidivist rate coming out of Missouri for juveniles is much lower than anywhere else in the nation. So we have that data available to us. And what they do that's different is they don't actually incarcerate kids in cages. Many of them are in homes that have, I mean, they're state-run homes, and they are incarcerated, quote unquote, but it's a kinder, gentler form of incarceration, I'd say. And the kids go to school. They have parents, quote unquote parents, state parents who live in the homes with them. They have therapy. Their families are receiving therapy as well. And when it is time for the kids to leave the incarceration center, the families are kept in touch with, right? There is literally a wraparound service that provides for us to follow what is happening and to connect you to the resources that you need. And it's not just the individual child that's looked at, it's the family and the community as well. And so we know that that system actually has been very effective in reducing recidivism, right? I think the recidivism rate there is in less than 10%, and nationwide it's sometimes as high as 80%. So it's a huge difference when we actually look at individuals as individuals. I know Tony was talking about this earlier as well. Everyone's not the same. And the only way to, I think, really successfully reduce recidivism is to view people as individuals and to find out what their individual needs are and attempt to address those needs as well. Right? So we do have at least one model. And there were lots of foundations that were actually supporting the teachings of this model to other states, right? But we don't have several other states that have adopted the model in full.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Tony.
I just wanted to say that I don't know if y'all know it or not, but it's millions and millions and millions of dollars that get applied for reentry. And to directly look at the situation is who gets this funding. The funding goes out, but the people that are put in position to run these programs, they would never choose me. They choose people that can't possibly run the program. You got police officers with training and firearms that's scared to patrol our neighborhoods. And do you hire somebody to think they're going to be able to run a program? You know, I've been in programs. I'm sitting here looking at Renee. Me and Renee was in a program, and it was a listening program. And the guy said, I'm glad you guys are on here because y'all the end of the street. And I'm looking at her like, we should be running this program then. Because y'all, what y'all in here for? So that's really what's happening. I'm just being blunt. Honest, the millions of dollars that's going in our community are going to programs of people that really can't help us.
This is the last question, and I think maybe the academics might have some information on this. I'm not sure. But the person said, is there any progress on lowering the 85% of mandatory time served? Do we know where that stands? I guess there's been a push to lower that percentage. Do we know where that stands?
It's not been gone through. It's been pushed a million times and they'll continue to, but right now it's still at a standstill where we don't know what's going to happen with it.
There's no political will to move in that direction right now, which is one of the reasons why I said legislatively that may not be the arena where our answers lie. You have to have the political will to move in that direction. You can have great ideas, like you were talking about earlier, great ideas, but if you don't have the votes to push it in that direction, it doesn't move.
And as a policymaker, she said vote. so again, that's the other part of that is really understanding the impact of your vote and why it's important to understand the people who we're voting for on particular issues, because again, as a local elected official or appointed official, the scope of your ability is limited. And I said this when we were doing a housing policy. We had to repeal our housing or our tenants' bill of rights because it was preempted by the state. And it's true, you know, WTF, like welcome to Florida, like wow. we're in a different place. And that's why I keep pushing back to say, okay, as we're working to flip the dynamics of our, you know, state government, there's things that we can be doing. You know, that whole all politics are local type mantra, but it's real because our chances of moving things at a statewide level right now are very slim, if non-existent, because there's no will to do it. And the other part of developing the political will is people of goodwill organizing and then saying this is a priority for us as a community. Again, there was not necessarily a political will for Amendment 4, but because of the way that the communities organized and rallied in every county around the state and having these different hubs and offices to really highlight the problem, putting, you know, people like Tony in front of them and being able to tell stories and hearing the stories of what the impact of these unjust policies are is another way that we can turn the tide and begin to build that political will. But it starts with us operating in the spaces that we're in, organizing with other people who share that goodwill, and then mobilizing to make the change that we want to see in our communities.
Can we give it up for our panelists? Thank you guys so much for your time. I do know we're going to take a short break before we actually start the simulation, and I want to invite one of our other speakers up to transition us into that next segment.
Thanks for coming out. God bless.
Thank you so much. If we could please give our moderator and our panelists another hand. I would like to thank each of you for sharing both your lived and professional experiences and keeping it personal, local, and immediate with the people in this room. We recognize that there is a lot of work being done, but there is still so much more to do. So we ask that you really lean into this next piece of the experience. We are going to break for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It is 1:40. I will give you all until 1:50. And when you come back, I would ask that you please take a seat in one of the yellow chairs on the opposite side of the room. We will have a few people in the area, staff members, team members, who can support in making sure you get to the right chairs. But if you could please return back there at 1:50, and we will be back up to share the next piece of the simulator experience.